Welcome to Jammin' with Jason Mefford, a show where we discuss topics relevant to chief audit executives and professionals in audit, risk, and compliance. We discuss the technical and soft skills needed to navigate the minefields of organizations. You hear best practices and practical advice for helping you advance your career, and we'll even talk about music, mindfulness, and psychology, because we can. So sit back and relax while you listen to the #1 podcast in the world for internal auditors, unscripted and unedited. Well, welcome everybody to another episode of Jammin' with Jason. Hey, I have got a fabulous guest on with me today, Barbara Siegenthaler, actually from Switzerland. If I remember right, you actually live in Switzerland, right?
Yes, I live in Zurich, Switzerland. Yes, thanks for having me.
It's a rough place to live. You know, Switzerland is actually one of my favorite places. I love that place. But we're going to talk about something interesting today that, again, may be a little groundbreaking for some of you. We might say some things that piss a few of you off. That's okay. That's what we're here for. But also to give you some encouragement on how we really need to change from an internal audit perspective if we really are serious about wanting to be more future oriented and changing with the times. Because the reality is, folks, most of you are doing the same kind of stuff that's been done for 100 years, and that's not how organizations operate anymore. So Barbara, let me bring you on. Maybe, explain just a little bit about what you do, because you add a different perspective. I thought I was the only crazy one talking about psychology and internal audit, but this is your lane as well. So maybe kind of explain to people a little bit about what you do and how you're trying to help organizations and internal audit groups.
Okay, so thank you very much. So some words about my background. I'm Swiss, grew up in Bern, the capital, then moved to Zurich for work. I'm coming from a family of lawyers, so I did law school first and eventually realized, maybe not the right thing for me. I loved the concise language, the logic in legal work. I also have the admission to practice as an attorney at law. But eventually I went to Zurich and joined a large insurance company where I was first in in-house consulting. Then I entered global, European and global projects. Then I went to outsourcing. And where I established a governance model on behalf of my organization for a global outsourcing contract, and audit and risk, as well as legal thought it was kind of a best practice approach globally. And then they asked me if I wanted to join group audit. Okay. And my initial thought was, oh my goodness, no.
Why would I want to go to internal audit, right?
No, I just had one touch point at this time with internal audit. It was actually an external resource, but it's a reputation of, coming to our offices always at the wrong time, asking strange questions, totally disruptive in a negative way. And eventually we got a report with findings we already knew. But so I thought, okay, let's give it a go. And
okay. So it's not to interrupt, but let me just kind of stop here, because this is, I've done things outside of audit as well. And as you described your career path, right, you did a lot of other things before you came to audit. But everybody that's listening, I want you to listen to what Barbara just said about how she viewed that internal auditor, right? Because that's how most of the people are viewing us, right? Showing up at times that are inconvenient, asking us weird questions, taking a bunch of our time, and then lobbing a report to us at the end. I kind of got that right, didn't I? That's kind of what...
Yeah, kind of. But okay. it was an external resource that had the group audit department at this time. So
okay.
Anyway, I said I got really fantastic offer to join group audit at this time. And it sounded like a fairy tale. So I said, let's give it a go. And I loved it. I really, really loved the profession. I think it's among the most underestimated professions. It's for people who love logical thinking, who always want to have a new challenge. It's beautiful. So I kind of fell in love with internal audit and stayed with the department for 6 years until 2015.
Okay. So now, once you left that, because again, kind of, so explain now kind of what you're doing and how all of this kind of comes about, because you are bringing kind of the psychology side into what you're doing now, right? And I know before we started hitting record, we were talking about how auditors are usually very binary in our thinking. We're black and white, zero white, or 0 1, right? And there's not a lot of gray area, but the reality is, I mean, the older I've gotten, there is no black and white. There's just shades of gray. There's no right or wrong. There are, varying perspectives and circumstances and ways that people think because of how they're conditioned. None are necessarily right or wrong. So, let's jump into the gray area a little bit
Yeah,
here, right?
just pre-corona, I just gave a speech to the Swiss internal auditors, where the key message was actually coming from the definition of internal audits, that we're not giving objective assurance and consulting services, but that this is highly subjective, highly subjective. So going back to 2015, so I left group audit. I was at a time in my life where I was intellectually bored. I was looking for a new challenge, didn't know what to do. And since it was a coincidence, I was reading in an article in a Swiss newspaper, an article about a psychological meta theories that sounded so interesting that I booked the first training course. It was a 3-day training course. And then I was surrounded, back in 2015, surrounded by shrinks, by psychologists, by professional coaches in this training course, and started digging into personality psychology. And this was so interesting for me. So I said it's kind of a sabbatical for me. So let's learn more about it. And eventually I came to a point rather sooner than later where I said, hey, hold on a minute. So what does this mean? What does this mean in the context of internal audit? And then I took it from there. So I started, at some point I said, I want to be an expert in this model. That's how I would like to work. That's what I would like to do in life. Basically crafted myself a job profile. It was developing a new model, a new approach of how to look at organizations using this meta theory. And also got in contact with the professor whose research I'm using. So this was in 2017. And he thought it's absolutely realistic what I'm doing. I came out of the meeting having him as collaboration partner. Yeah, maybe a few words about the model if this is helpful.
Yeah, because you've kind of created, and this is the organizational personality framework that you're kind of developing, right? Yep.
So it's a model from academic psychology based on more than 30 years of academic research. It has an extraordinary reputation. It's said to be groundbreaking, unique, and highly innovative. And there's even the German Psychological Society even said that psychology has virtually no comparable theoretical frameworks or dynamic theories. So what does it say? Does it say it's a model that looks at personality from the perspective of personality systems? So it says the focus are the interconnectivities or the interconnection patterns between these personality systems that are characteristic for human personality. And then I said, okay, this all sounds good. So what about two people? Could the challenges, for example, that a couple has, could also be caused by this personality system connectivity patterns? And eventually I said, okay, what about the group? And then I said, what about the department? What about in organizations? And then I decided that I would like to learn this model, become an expert in the model, and also in the personality scans, the diagnostics that goes along with it, that I can reverse engineer the process, that I can identify the patterns at an organizational level. And that's what I started doing, yeah.
Well, and so, because a lot of people that don't have a psychological background may not be that familiar with personalities, this whole term, right? There's some different tests that are out there like Myers-Briggs, DISC. I know you're giving a big thumbs down, right? Those
Yes,
are those are and they all of those kind of things have some of their challenges, uh, right? Because anyway, they have their challenges, but the idea behind them is right. If you're a certain Myers-Briggs personality type, like I'm an INTJ, right? Is now by understanding more of kind of what my personality is, I understand better how to interact with myself, right? What my personal motivations are, how I choose to or prefer to work with other people. But then as I start to understand other people's personality types, now I can adapt myself to be more successful at working with them. Right. I mean, kind of at a high level, you're more the expert on this, but I'm trying to kind of make it so that the people that are listening without a big background kind of understand what we're meaning by personality types, and then how we can kind of relate that to organizations as well. Because I think people forget organizations have personalities just like people do, and we forget that.
exactly, exactly, and that's where I'm coming from. What we can use from the model, and the name of the model is the Theory of Personality Systems Interaction, so PSI theory. What we can use from PSI theory are the motives. It's power, achievement, affiliation, and freedom.
Mhm.
And we can use four fundamentally different ways how humans process informations. And if you combine these motives and the information processes, we already end up with 50 interaction patterns between personality systems. And so it all comes down to what do we see? And you can apply to this actually to the entire work of internal auditors, starting from who are you hiring?
Mhm.
What risks am I addressing? What kind of risks are these? What kind of finding do I have? What's the strategy of the organization? How do I talk about the results? Customizing the audit insights to the audience. So
Mhm.
it's basically playing around with this. And I have a nice, where is it? Give me a second. Yeah, I have a nice definition of how I call it. It's basically the focus of my work is the complex interplay between content, activation level, and system connections of personality systems at the individual auditor, engagement, functional, and organizational levels. So it's all together. And of course, you really must know what you're doing. I mean, it's personality psychology, and where I was wrong, I thought I would study the model and then start working. I never expected that it would take me up to 5 years, really, to be able to play around with it. So
Well,
it's nothing you can learn fast.
yeah, I mean, I've done the same thing with developing different frameworks or models over time. And it takes a lot of time, because
Yeah,
what you're doing is you're looking outside of your particular area, right? And then it takes time, first off, to get the knowledge and the skills associated with that.
yeah,
Then you've got to assimilate it and kind of create abilities or ways of thinking and applying it back to yourself. And then you actually have to work through it a few times to make sure that it actually works. And it does take years, right? So I totally understand. It's like, I've got some little pretty pictures that I've developed, and it's like, it looks nice, but you'd be surprised how many years or time goes into it, right?
well, I once heard the quote that, someone said, I'm writing you, I think it was Oscar Wilde, I'm writing you a long letter because I don't have time.
Yeah, because I don't have time to write a short one.
Because I don't have time to write a short one.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, it really took a lot of time, but it works also when I started with my first clients. It absolutely does what I envisaged it to do back in 2015. It works perfectly. It gives a lot of new insights, and it is very, very fast because I'm working on the background of a system theory I can leverage. Plus, it is extremely elegant.
Mm-hmm.
What's important is, so it's still a model. So we're not talking about the one and only truth, and it's a model. You must know what it can do and what it can't. So I'm adding additional models and additional knowledge to my work. For example, hypnosystemic. So
Yeah.
Milton Erickson's approach. Yeah, so I'm adding this as well. So I think at some point it gets an individual combination of the work you're doing. Yeah.
Well, and this is some of the stuff again. I mean, you talked about different levels, kind of at the individual level, maybe a team level,
Mm-hmm.
department, organization. There's different levels where these interactions actually happen, right? And so what I thought would be interesting is maybe let's go back and just talk about internal audit or internal auditors in general. Because I can't remember if we mentioned it since we've recorded or if it was in the pre-talk, but some of the things that came up that I figured we should make sure and talk about. And the first one you just made you made a reference a little while ago to, in the definition of internal auditing, we are an independent and objective assurance and consulting function. Okay. And again, those few words took committees like 10 or 20 years to argue about what words to put in there. But a word that we like to use all the time is objective. We like to believe that we are objective. But
Yes.
at the core, we're humans, right? And because we're humans, can we ever truly be objective? And the answer is no, because of all of these things that kind of come into our personality, right? It's our motives. It's the way that
Absolutely,
we want
yes.
to process things, right? So maybe let's talk about that a little bit, because this is one of those, folks. I told you sometimes I'm going to reach through and shake you a little bit, and I think this is one of those things. You're not as objective as you think you are. There's a lot of subconscious biases that you're doing, that you're living through, and so But now that we know that, now we can start to try to look at it and peel these things back.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about that maybe a little bit and some of this stuff, because I
Okay.
know you said you just gave a speech on that, right?
Yeah, subjectivity.
Yeah.
So maybe I have different ways how I look at the topic of objectivity. I can give you, let's have four different angles I can give you. So the first one is, if we differentiate between living systems and dead systems.
Okay. So what do you
In
mean by that?
object,
Living versus
living like a machine, a dead system, like a machine, a clock, or a
okay.
train engine. Okay, but maybe 100 years ago, without electronics. So
No, trains in Switzerland, very on time.
they are, yes. No, but the point is, as soon as you have a human involved, it's a living system. It's a living system. So we're talking about complexity. And we talk about the different variables that are interconnected and that influence each other. So you don't get anywhere with binary thinking.
Right.
So this would be a first point. If I take it from PSI theory, I would say, if an auditor has a look at a topic, he brings his knowledge and he brings his experience to the project, and he brings his thinking and behavior patterns.
Mm-hmm.
So he can't really do some magic. At some point, what he will see will be a reflection of what he knows and how he or she thinks. I can also take it from a hypnosystemic perspective, saying reality doesn't exist per se. Reality is a construct.
It is.
It doesn't. I mean, it depends. It's a result of attention focusing processes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then if we can also take it from an information processing perspective, saying humans have different ways how they process information, and the analytical ones, that's just 2 out of the 4 ways. And it's kind of a control illusion, because all that they can process is 1 or 2 moments of consciousness.
Hmm.
So from whichever angle I take it, from my professional expertise and experience, I have to say, I don't think we are objective, and we should be fair enough to say that this is the case.
Well, because we come with, like you said, all of our learning, all of our context, and again, this is going to be, it's a little mind blowing for some people that haven't really researched or thought about this, but there is no specific reality other than the reality that we see. And so you almost have to think about it like you're walking around holding up a mirror. And we view the world the way we view it because of our personality, because of our experiences, because of the conditioning, that we have come up with, right? And we won't get too esoteric, or we're going to lose everybody on this if we start really philosophizing, even though I'd like to. but
Also, it would be tempting, wouldn't it?
I know it would be tempting. We'll just go on the 2 hour rant. I'll go put my thinking cap on, literally. I have a British thinking cap. I'll get into that at a different time, the story behind that. But so let's think about, because again, like you said, we are not as objective as we think we are, because we bring all of these things, and our subjectivity comes into this. And this is one of those areas where most auditors have a bias for certain types of risk, and we are fearful in our nature. We don't want bad things to happen. We're trying to not have bad things happen, but we focus on certain risks that we believe are important, and we exclude everything else. And again, this is, I've got
Well,
lots of stories behind this, but I kind of want to hear
using
your take on this,
so
because
using PSI theory, one of the four information processing, the ways how humans process information is analytical. It's
uh-huh.
part of elementary cognition. Um, it is on the experiential axis,
Mhm.
and it has the characteristic of looking exactly at one item.
Mhm.
It's a discrepancy focus. It's a focus on mistakes. It's a focus on a part of a pattern that doesn't fit in. And I think internal auditors are probably pretty strong in this type of processing information. And I think what can be typical for an internal auditor who's new to the profession, that he or she does the audit, and then they end up with a huge number of individual insights, and they can't get a picture out of it. And that's exactly this thinking way. So it's beautiful. It's it's a beautiful way to think, but it's just one out of four ways to process information. And what every individual who's strong in this information processing way should be able to do is to distinguish between, go very deep and look at one detail, and then go and have a look at the whole again.
Yeah.
So it's how to say, it's moving between these two ways of processing information. So I think at some point it's really ingrained in internal auditors to be fearful and to be anxious. And then on the other side, you have auditors who think, what kind of crazy bureaucratic insights are they giving us now?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, and I see this show up. So here's just kind of a real life example of that, right? Is again, kind of our biases having us focus in on one particular thing. Auditors love fraud. Anything related to fraud, they just get all excited about, right? But again, but if you wear the lens of, there's a lot of fraud happening in my organization, all you're going to be looking for is fraud at that very narrow level. When you step back and look at it at the bigger picture, the reality is less than 5%, and it's probably only 1% of the people in your organization are actually committing any kind of fraud. 95 to 99% of the people are just trying to do the best they can with what they have, right? But again, if we get so focused on that fear or just on certain risks, then that's all we're going to focus on. and we're going to have these blind spots and just totally not even see other things, because we're so close to just looking at the tree, we forget that we're in the forest.
Yeah, that's a good example. This proverb, you know, you can't see the forest anymore because of the trees.
Hmm.
So looking at the tree is the information processing that focuses on one item, and the forest is the whole, the whole.
Hmm.
And so we call it emotional dialectic. It's moving from one to the other information processing system. I'd like to bring another element into it. If we look at the future, for example, we take the World Economic Forum, the Global Competitiveness Report. They talk about disruptive technologies. They talk about novel value creation. And they say that the factors that will grow in significance are human capital, agility, resilience, and innovation. And the question is, what can auditors bring to the table? Can they provide assurance regarding these topics? And not only assurance, it's about embracing foresight. Do they have a predictive element? And what's interesting, you know, last year, the internal audit services of the European Commission, they have a conference, an annual conference, and the name was from hindsight to insights and beyond, how internal audit may contribute to foresight. So the topic is basically, you know, it's say no, something have to be done.
Well, and it's funny because that's a big conundrum for most of us to kind of get through, because again, as we're talking about personalities, like within audit groups, right? If you look at most internal audit departments, they're fairly homogenous in the personality types they choose to hire, right? And a lot of those are kind of historical, again, because we focus so much on the hindsight, right? We're looking backwards all the time, and we get people that are very check the box compliant, binary thinking of, was it right or was it wrong in the past? But to turn around and try to have foresight or insight about the future requires a totally different skill set.
Yeah.
That honestly auditors have not been taught, because even if we go back to something as simple as risk management, and I know I probably piss people off when I say things like this, but internal audit does not understand risk and risk management as well as they think they do, because the way that the lens that internal audit thinks about risk is very narrow in its focus, back to our discussion before, and it's very low level in the organization. We're not spending much time talking about or thinking about strategic level risks, which are more about the things in the future. We're
Yeah,
worried more about the
yeah.
system or the process breaking, instead of things like innovation and how can we be innovative in the future as an organization. That's totally different way of looking at it.
Yeah, and strategic risk for me is basically I mean, it's kind of a prediction. What can we do to help the organization survive? I mean, times will be tough.
Yeah.
And I think that the traditional auditors that maybe does business audits, this is kind of going to disappear. It will be all around IT and around psychology.
Mhm.
This would be my gut feel how the profession should evolve. And if I bring my work in, I mean, I would like to see mature organizational personality, and a mature organizational personality can recruit personality systems that are best suited for the task. So I would like to see internal auditor, if they work with the model I've been developing, um, give an assurance, like what are the thinking and behavior preferences of the organization right now? What are the pros? What are the cons? Is it fit for purpose what the organization is doing? If it's one-sided, then the drawbacks of the patterns that are in place currently are risks that could materialize.
Mhm.
And I think the biggest advantage of my work is really that this organizational personality framework, it's like a 360-degree thinking and evaluation grid for human factors across the organization. So from strategy, culture, innovation, change, program, recruiting, leadership, governance, assurance, you can use it, and you get insights that you can compare. Is it the one and only truth? Of course not. It's a pair of glasses you can put on, and then you know, okay, now I'm having a look at the audited area or the organization from the perspective of the organizational personality framework. And then you have other methodologies and frameworks in place. Have you seen, Jason, have you seen the April edition of the Harvard Business Review?
I
It
have not
includes,
actually read that one yet.
it
April?
included, yeah, April. Okay, there's an article in there. It says how banks are using behavioral science to prevent scandals. It's an insight from the behavioral risk teams that some Dutch and UK companies have in place. So it's the ING, ABN AMRO, and the Royal Bank of Scotland.
Okay.
So they have small teams, organizational psychologists, anthropology, forensics, small teams, and they start looking at these topics as well. So I think there are, yeah, the profession's kind of evolving a little bit there, yes.
Well, and it's funny because, again, as you mentioned, the World Economic Forum, kind of the future, those words that you put out there, like, innovation and some of these other words,
Yeah.
what we're seeing in business in general is a difference in the value proposition, if you will. Okay. And when I was back at Arthur Andersen, in the late 90s, we were actually doing some research and trying to figure out like the value of human capital in an organization, because you look at some of the cap rates on companies. You've got a company like Apple that has over $1 trillion market capitalization, but if you look at the assets on their balance sheet, it's nothing in comparison to that. And the gap has something to do with the human capital, this living system within the organization. That's where most of the value is in today's organizations. The production line, once the systems are set up from an IT perspective, unless it's something like an algorithm, which again was developed by whom? Human capital, the living system. That's where the value in organizations is and is going to be going forward. So if we're still just focusing on these subsystems that really don't add that much value to the overall organization, then we're missing a big mark. We need to start understanding and getting more into this. And this is where, again, psychology comes in, because it helps to explain why humans do the things that they do, because we're irrational. We're not binary.
Exactly. And
And
predicting what they might do and how the story might go on. And, I mean, it's now maybe a little bit a harsh picture or a harsh metaphor I'm using, but I think going on with how it used to be is kind of like the entire profession committing suicide.
Mhm. I
Which
don't
is
think it's that
dangerous.
harsh. I don't think it's that harsh.
Dangerous.
Yeah, because I've been saying, I haven't used that analogy before, but I might have to kind of use that, because if, as our organizations are changing, if we don't change, eventually we are effectively committing suicide. We're working ourselves out of a job because we're not changing as our organizations are changing.
And also not not being progressive enough and not adding value, because at some point I expect many of the controls that are currently being reviewed by internal auditors might end up being reviewed automatically.
They will. That's where the bots and the AI are coming in right now.
Automation will come out. So what's remaining, and then it's basically the human factors, knowing how humans behave and how the story will go on. And it's also a topic like ethics, not from a fraud perspective, what is important as well, but ethics, it's yeah. No, it's very interesting times, and I really love the profession. You know, I heard your podcast, a touch of gray. Then you said a touch of gray. I
You got to
like
hear
it.
me
I
sing on
always,
that one too, didn't you? Or-
well, we can start singing as well, but a touch of gray, you know. So, and you really said that you care about the internal auditors and the internal audit profession. I mean, I spent a lot of time not only working as an internal auditor, but basically creating a new way to work for internal auditors. And the reception is, even when I'm exaggerating, the acceptance is talking to internal auditors. And sometimes, even when I say interconnectivity patterns between personality systems, the system is already shut down. People say, we don't understand this.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's about
We
time they
don't
start
understand this.
understanding it.
And you know, it's actually complexity. It's about, you know, having more than three elements you're playing around with. You know, I mean, this binary thinking is a beauty. I love it as well. Analytical thinking, it's great, but we have to know what it can and what it can't, and when to switch it on and when to switch it off, and when to use other things. And so we should, in my view, we should become experts in human behavior combined with our knowledge that we have today. But this would require an entirely or partly different formation and training.
Yeah, and maybe that's another, you know, because like you said, when you start saying things like, you know, organizational personality, and you start talking about, you know, some of these different things, people just kind of zone out, right? And maybe people do too. When I just even use the word psychology, they're like, oh, you know, well, okay, if you don't like those words, how about human behavior? Hey,
Yeah.
everybody, you need to understand human behavior better than you currently do. Because I can guarantee you most of the problems you're having, even like with an audit client, let's say you've got an audit client that's just a pain in the butt, right? Well, it's because you don't understand human behavior. You don't understand what you're doing and how that's affecting that person, and how what they're doing is actually mirroring back to you actually some of the stuff that you're doing, right? And so we have to learn, we have to get into the human side of it, because like you said, most of the stuff that we've been auditing for 100 years is being automated, and we don't need people to do what audit has done for the last 100 years. We got computers that can do that. So if you want to stay relevant, you've got to understand and learn how human behavior goes, and how we need to start tying that into what we're doing as auditors.
Yeah, 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 absolutely, yes. I fully agree. Yeah.
Well, and
Yeah,
with that, I
so
just kind of looked at the time we got. We're going to end up having to kind of cut it off now. Like I said, I think we could both geek out for a couple hours just talking about all this stuff. But um, you know, maybe any final thoughts that you have for people to just kind of, you know, wrap up a little bit of what we've been talking about here for half hour, 40 minutes.
any thoughts? Yes, have a look at my webpage. I have a
Yeah.
beautiful webpage out there that explains my work really good. It's kind of, it's almost a gift to the internal audit profession, and you can find it at personality-based-audit.com.
Well, that's
Personality-based-audit.com. And if you
minus.
want it very short and sweet, go to my webpage for non-auditors. That's savantion.com.
And how do you spell that? Savantion, S-A-V.
Oh, I'll let you know, and then we
Okay.
put it in
What
in
we'll
the
do,
text.
we'll put it in the show notes, so that way people,
Yeah,
you just go down, click on it, and you'll actually be
yeah.
taken out there.
And it's really, we need more psychology in internal audit to remain and stay relevant. We need predictive insights, and we should be aware that it is subjective.
Yeah.
We give subjective assurance.
Ooh,
Sorry.
we're gonna get a lot of people. Well, the reality is, like we said before, we believe we're giving objective, but it's really subjective, because it's all based again on our biases and that of our group. as well.
Yeah, and admitting that it's subjective, that's where the power of the profession is, because then you can start talking.
Mm-hmm.
That's where the power of the profession is.
Very true. Very true. Well, thank you, Barbara, for taking time with me today.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
I always love finding that there's other people in the world that maybe are just as crazy as me. so thank you. Oh,
You're most welcome.
And everybody, so go out and, again, go back. This is a good episode for you to even go back and listen to again, because I know some of the things that we maybe said the first time, if they're terms that you're not really familiar with, because Barbara and I have both been in this area for quite a while, talking about some of these things, that go back, listen to it again, take some notes, and again, go out to her website, look up the information that she has out there. She's giving you a gift, so go get the gift. Okay, click in the show notes down below and actually go out and get it, because it's going to help you to understand human behavior better, because that's what we've got to start understanding better and start incorporating into what we're doing in the future. All right. So Barbara, again, thank you.
Thank you very much.
And everybody have a great week, and we'll catch you on a future episode of Jamming with Jason. See ya. And that's a wrap. Thanks for listening to today's episode of Jamming with Jason. Keep on rocking in the audit world. Have a great rest of your day, and I'll catch you later on the next show. If you'd like to earn continuing professional education for listening to today's episode, head on over to C-Risk Academy at ondemand.criskacademy.com. And that's C as in the letter C, riskacademy.com. Not only do you get a CPE certificate, but you also will have access to the video version of today's show. The views and opinions expressed on this show are that of the individuals and not of their respective organizations.